Welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe for the best Reddit creepypasta stories, perfect for bedtime chills. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to leave a comment. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the story. I always thought my grandfather was a bit of an eccentric. He had these peculiar sayings, little nuggets of wisdom or warnings that seemed to come from nowhere. One that always stuck with me was, "Those who play Ouija board to the forest near, they shall disappear." I laughed it off as a kid, another one of Grandpa's quirks. But as I grew older, it became a dark little mantra that I couldn't shake, especially after what happened to my girlfriend, Lily. We were high school sweethearts, the kind of couple that seemed destined to be together forever. We did everything together, from lazy Sunday mornings to wild Friday nights. One of our favourite things to do was explore the woods near my grandfather's house. It was a dense, ancient forest filled with towering trees and an eerie, almost mystical silence. Lily was always the adventurous one. She had this fascination with the supernatural, collecting ghost stories and weird artifacts from thrift shops. So when she found an old Ouija board at a flea market, her eyes lit up with excitement. I was hesitant, remembering Grandpa's warning, but Lily's enthusiasm was contagious. We decided to take it to our favourite spot in the forest, a secluded clearing where we often had picnics. It was a chilly autumn evening, the sky a deep, foreboding grey. The leaves crunched under our feet as we walked, the sound oddly loud in the stillness. We set up the Ouija board on an old blanket, and Lily lit a few candles, their flickering flames casting eerie shadows on the trees. We sat opposite each other, our fingers lightly resting on the planchette. At first, it was just a bit of fun. We asked the usual questions. "Is anyone there? Can you tell us your name?" The planchette moved slowly, spelling out random letters. We laughed, thinking it was just the wind or our own nervous energy. But then, things took a darker turn. The planchette started to move more forcefully, spelling out words that sent chills down my spine. Danger, leave, forest. Lily's face paled, but she brushed it off, saying it was probably just a coincidence. I wasn't so sure, but I didn't want to seem like a coward. We pressed on, asking more questions. The answers became more disturbing, hinting at a malevolent presence watching us. I could feel the atmosphere change, the air growing colder, the shadows deeper. Lily's hands were trembling, but she insisted we continue. Then, the planchette spelled out a single word that made my blood run cold. "Run." Before I could react, the candles went out, plunging us into darkness. I heard a rustling in the trees, a low, guttural growl that didn't sound like any animal I knew. Lily screamed, and I grabbed her hand, pulling her to her feet. We ran blindly through the forest, the darkness closing in around us. I don't know how long we ran, but eventually we stumbled out of the forest, panting and shaking. Lily was hysterical, tears streaming down her face. We swore to never speak of that night again, to forget the Ouija board and my grandfather's warning. But deep down, I knew we had stirred something in those woods, something that wouldn't let us go so easily. A week later, Lily went missing. She'd gone for a walk in the woods and never came back. The search parties found nothing, no trace of her at all. It was like she had vanished into thin air. The police questioned me endlessly, but I couldn't tell them the truth. Who would believe that a Ouija board had something to do with her disappearance? I was devastated, consumed by guilt and fear. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, heard her scream. I started having nightmares, vivid and terrifying, of being chased through the forest by unseen forces. Grandpa tried to comfort me, but I could see the fear in his eyes too. He knew something he wasn't telling me. I begged him to explain, to tell me what was happening. He just shook his head, muttering his cryptic warning over and over again. "Those who play Ouija board to the forest near, they shall disappear." I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know the truth. I had to find Lily. So one night, I decided to go back to the forest, to the clearing where it all began. I took the Ouija board with me, determined to get answers. The forest was even more foreboding than I remembered. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches like skeletal hands reaching out to grab me. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot and my own ragged breathing. I reached the clearing and set up the Ouija board, lighting the candles with shaking hands. I sat down, placing my fingers on the planchette. "Is anyone there?" I whispered, my voice barely audible in the stillness. The planchette didn't move. I asked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I felt a surge of frustration and fear. "Please," I begged, "tell me what happened to Lily." The planchette jerked suddenly, spelling out one word. "Trapped." A chill ran down my spine. "Where?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Forest," it spelled out. "Evil." I felt a presence behind me, a cold breath on my neck. I turned around, but there was nothing there. The shadows seemed to shift and move, forming dark, twisted shapes. I felt a rising panic, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had to know the truth. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The planchette moved slowly, spelling out a final, chilling message. "You." I felt a cold hand grab my shoulder, and I screamed, knocking the Ouija board over as I scrambled to my feet. I ran as fast as I could, the darkness closing in around me. I could hear footsteps behind me, a low growl that sent chills down my spine. I burst out of the forest, gasping for breath. I looked back, but there was nothing there, just the dark, silent trees, watching me. I don't know what I unleashed that night, but I knew it wasn't over. Lily was still out there, trapped by something evil. And now, it wanted me too. The days after my second encounter in the forest felt like a waking nightmare. My mind was plagued with constant fear and guilt. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had taken Lily was now watching me, waiting for its chance to strike. Sleep was a distant memory, and my waking hours were consumed with trying to understand what was happening. I spent hours online, delving into forums and websites about the supernatural and the occult. Most of what I found was pure nonsense, but occasionally I stumbled upon something that resonated with my experience. Stories of dark entities that could be summoned and controlled through Ouija boards, malevolent spirits that preyed on the living. It was all too familiar. I couldn't tell anyone about what was happening. The police were still investigating Lily's disappearance, and I was already under suspicion. Telling them I thought she was taken by an evil spirit in the woods would have landed me in a psychiatric ward, so I kept everything to myself, isolating further from friends and family. One evening, I decided to visit my grandfather again. He was the only person who might have answers. I found him sitting on the porch of his old, creaky house, a distant look in his eyes. He seemed older, more worn out than I remembered. When he saw me, his face darkened with worry. "Grandpa, please," I pleaded, sitting beside him. "I need to know what you meant about the Ouija board in the forest. What happened to Lily?" He sighed heavily, looking out into the distance. "You should have listened, boy. I warned you." "I know," I said, my voice trembling. "But I need to know what we're dealing with, please." He took a long pause, as if deciding whether or not to tell me. Finally, he began to speak in a low, grave tone. "That forest, it's not just any forest. It's ancient, older than this town. There are stories, legends, about spirits and creatures that dwell in those woods. Evil things. When I was a boy, my friends and I used to play there. One day, we found an old, dusty Ouija board in a hidden clearing. We thought it was a game, just like you did." He paused, his eyes filled with painful memories. "We played it, and strange things started happening. One by one, my friends began to disappear. They'd go into the forest and never come back. I was the only one who escaped, but I never stopped hearing their voices, calling out to me, begging for help." I shivered. the weight of his words sinking in. What can I do? How do I save Lily? Grandpa shook his head. I don't know if you can, but if you want to try, you have to be prepared. There are things in that forest that can't be faced alone. You need help, knowledge, and strength. And most importantly, you need to respect the spirits. They don't like to be disturbed. Determined to find Lily, I began to prepare. I visited every occult shop in town, buying books, protective charms, and anything that might help. I studied every night, learning about rituals, protections, and the nature of spirits. I even contacted a few paranormal experts online, hoping for guidance. One name kept coming up in my research, a local medium named Eleanor. She was rumoured to be incredibly powerful, with a deep understanding of the supernatural. Desperate, I decided to seek her out. Eleanor lived in an old, run-down house on the edge of town. The place looked like something out of a horror movie, with its peeling paint and overgrown yard. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding. After a long moment, the door creaked open, and a woman in her 60s peered out at me. Her eyes were sharp, almost piercing, and she had an air of authority about her. "You must be the boy who stirred up trouble in the forest," she said, her voice a mix of curiosity and annoyance. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "I need your help. My girlfriend Lily. She's missing. I think the Ouija board we used summoned something. I need to find her." Eleanor studied me for a moment before stepping aside to let me in. Her house was filled with strange artifacts, crystals, and old books. The air smelled of incense and herbs. She led me to a small, dimly lit room and gestured for me to sit. "You've meddled with forces you don't understand," she said, sitting opposite me. "The forest is a place of power, and you've awakened something dark. Finding your girlfriend will not be easy, and it will come at a cost." "I'm willing to do whatever it takes," I said, desperation clear in my voice. She nodded, pulling out a deck of tarot cards. "First, we need to see what we're dealing with." She laid out the cards, each one depicting ominous and foreboding images. Her brow furrowed as she read them, her expression growing more serious with each card. When she finished, she looked at me with a mixture of pity and resolve. "The entity you summoned is ancient and powerful. It feeds on fear and despair, and it has taken your girlfriend as a means to lure you deeper into its grasp. You must confront it in the forest, at the place where you played the Ouija board, but you won't be able to do this alone." Eleanor handed me a small pouch filled with protective herbs and a silver amulet. "These will help shield you from its influence, but you need to find others who can aid you, people who have encountered the supernatural before. Together, you might stand a chance." I left Eleanor's house with a mix of hope and dread. I had a direction, a plan, but I knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger. I had to gather a team, people who could help me confront the evil in the forest and save Lily. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard a faint whispering outside my window. I froze, my heart pounding. The voices were distant but unmistakable. Lily calling out for help. I knew then that the entity was taunting me, reminding me of what was at stake. Determined, I began reaching out to anyone who might help. I posted on paranormal forums, contacted old friends who had experienced strange phenomena, and even visited the local library to search for any records of similar occurrences. The days passed in a blur of research and preparation. Slowly, I began to piece together a group of people willing to face the unknown. There was Sam, a former priest who had experienced a demonic possession case. Claire, a paranormal investigator with a knack for sensing spirits. And Mark, an experienced hunter who had encountered strange creatures in the wilderness. We met at my house one evening, the tension palpable. I explained everything that had happened, from my grandfather's warning to Lily's disappearance and my encounter with Eleanor. They listened intently, their faces a mix of skepticism and concern. "We're dealing with something powerful," I said, my voice steady. "But together, we can face it. We have to save Lily." Sam nodded, his expression resolute. "We'll need to be careful, and we must stay united." The entity will try to divide us, to weaken our resolve. But if we stick together, we can overcome it. We spent the next few days preparing, gathering supplies, and planning our approach. Each of us brought our unique skills and knowledge to the table, forming a cohesive unit ready to face the darkness. Finally, the night came. We set out for the forest, the air heavy with anticipation. As we entered the woods, I felt a chill run down my spine. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, and the shadows seemed to move and shift around us. We reached the clearing, the place where Lily and I had played the Ouija board. The candles and blanket were still there, a haunting reminder of that fateful night. We set up our equipment, drawing protective circles and lighting candles infused with protective herbs. As we began the ritual, I felt the air grow colder, the darkness pressing in around us. The others chanted prayers and invocations, their voices steady and strong. I held the Ouija board, my hands trembling. "Is anyone there?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The planchette moved slowly, spelling out a single word. "Yes." "What do you want?" I asked, my heart pounding. The planchette moved again, spelling out fear. A cold wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing the candles. We were plunged into darkness, the silence oppressive. I felt a presence, a malevolent force watching us. Suddenly, the ground shook, and a low, guttural growl echoed through the trees. I saw dark shapes moving in the shadows, closing in on us. The entity was here, and it was angry. We stood our ground, chanting and holding our protective charms. The air grew colder, and I felt a crushing weight on my chest. The others were struggling too, their faces contorted with fear and pain. But we didn't give up. We pressed on, our voices growing stronger. The entity roared in anger, the ground shaking violently. I could see it now, a dark, twisted form emerging from the shadows, its eyes burning with malevolence. I held up the amulet Eleanor had given me, feeling its warmth in my hand. "Release her!" I shouted, my voice filled with determination. "Release Lily!" The entity recoiled, its form shifting and writhing. It let out a deafening scream, and I felt a surge of energy. The others joined in, their voices united in a powerful chant. The entity's form began to dissipate, its screams growing fainter. The ground stopped shaking, and the oppressive weight lifted. The darkness receded, and I saw a figure lying on the ground. "Lily!" I ran to her, my heart pounding. She was unconscious but breathing. I cradled her in my arms, tears streaming down my face. We had done it. We had confronted the darkness and saved her. But as we left the forest, I knew this was only the beginning. The entity was weakened but not defeated. It would return, and we would have to be ready. The forest held many secrets, and we had only scratched the surface. As we walked back to civilization, I felt a newfound sense of purpose. We had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. But the journey was far from over. The forest still held many mysteries, and I was determined to uncover them all. Lily was back, but she wasn't the same. She woke up with no memory of what happened in the forest, and while she was physically unharmed, there was a change in her. She was distant, her eyes often unfocused, like she was seeing something I couldn't. The nightmares that plagued my sleep now seemed to have found their way into her waking hours. She would sometimes mumble in her sleep, uttering things that sent chills down my spine. Darkness, trapped, coming. Our group remained vigilant. We knew the entity wasn't gone for good. Its presence lingered in the back of our minds, a constant reminder of the evil we had confronted. We continued our research, meeting regularly to discuss our findings and plan our next steps. But the forest seemed to have an insidious way of creeping into our lives, affecting us all in subtle, disturbing ways. Sam, the former priest, started experiencing strange phenomena at his home. Crosses turned upside down, eerie whispers in the night, and the overwhelming scent of decay. Claire, the paranormal investigator, reported seeing dark figures at the edge of her vision, always just out of sight but never truly gone. Mark, the hunter, found dead animals outside his cabin, their eyes wide with terror and their bodies mutilated in ways no natural predator could manage. One evening, as we gathered at my house, Lily suddenly stood up, her eyes wide and unfocused. "It's here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. We all froze, the air growing heavy with an unnatural chill. The lights flickered, and a low, guttural growl echoed through the room. The entity had found us, even outside the forest. Eleanor, who had become a crucial part of our group, was prepared. She quickly set up protective charms and began chanting, her voice strong and unwavering. The growl intensified, and I could feel the ground trembling beneath my feet. The air grew colder, and a dark, oppressive presence filled the room. "Stay together," Eleanor commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Do not let it divide us." We huddled close, holding our protective charms tightly. The shadows around us twisted and writhed, forming grotesque shapes. I could see the entity now, a dark, shifting mass with eyes that burned with malevolence. It moved closer, its form growing larger and more defined. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, my voice trembling. "What do you want from us?" The entity's eyes fixed on me, and I felt a surge of fear and despair. It didn't speak, but I could feel its thoughts invading my mind. Images of darkness, pain, and suffering flooded my senses. It thrived on our fear, feeding off our despair. Eleanor's chanting grew louder, and the entity recoiled slightly. "We need to weaken its hold," she said, her voice strained. "It feeds on fear. We must stay strong." We joined in the chant, our voices shaky but determined. The entity let out a deafening roar, the ground shaking violently. The shadows around us grew darker, and I could feel a cold, crushing weight on my chest. But we didn't give up. We pressed on, our voices growing stronger, united in our resolve. The entity's form began to waver, its eyes flickering with anger and frustration. I could feel its grip weakening, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. It let out a final, ear-piercing scream before dissipating into the shadows, leaving us in silence. We stood there, panting and shaken but unharmed. The room felt lighter, the oppressive presence gone, but I knew this was only a temporary victory. The entity was weakened, but it wasn't defeated. It would come back, stronger and more determined. As we sat down, catching our breath, Eleanor spoke. "We need to find a way to banish it for good. There must be something in the forest, something that can help us. We need to go back." The thought of returning to the forest filled me with dread, but I knew she was right. We couldn't live in fear, constantly looking over our shoulders. We had to confront the entity and end this once and for all. We spent the next few days preparing for our journey back to the forest. We gathered supplies, protective charms, and any information that might help us. Lily was determined to come with us, despite her fragile state. She insisted that she needed to face whatever had taken her, to reclaim her life and her memories. The night we set out was eerily similar to the first time Lily and I had ventured into the forest with the Ouija board. The sky was a deep, foreboding grey, and the air was filled with an unsettling stillness. As we walked through the dense trees, I could feel the darkness closing in around us, the shadows growing deeper and more menacing. We reached the clearing, the place where it all began. The remnants of our previous visit were still there, a haunting reminder of that fateful night. Eleanor set up the protective charms and began chanting, her voice strong and unwavering. We stood in a circle, our hands joined, determined to face the darkness together. The air grew colder, and I could feel the oppressive presence of the entity growing stronger. The shadows around us twisted and writhed, forming grotesque shapes. The ground shook, and a low, guttural growl echoed through the trees. Suddenly, the entity appeared, its dark, shifting form towering over us. Its eyes burned with malevolence, and I could feel its thoughts invading my mind, filling me with fear and despair. "Stay strong," Eleanor shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Do not let it divide us." We tightened our grip on each other's hands, our voices joining in the chant. The entity let out a deafening roar, the ground shaking violently. The shadows around us grew darker, and I could feel a cold, crushing weight on my chest. But we didn't give up. We pressed on, our voices growing stronger, united in our resolve. The entity's form began to waver, its eyes flickering with anger and frustration. I could feel its grip weakening, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. It let out a final, ear-piercing scream before dissipating into the shadows, leaving us in silence. We stood there, panting and shaken but unharmed. The clearing felt lighter, the oppressive presence gone. But I knew this was only a temporary victory. The entity was weakened, but it wasn't defeated. It would come back, stronger and more determined. Eleanor turned to me, her eyes filled with determination. We need to find its source, its anchor to this world. There must be something in this forest, something that binds it here. We need to find it and destroy it. I nodded, my resolve strengthening. We had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, but our journey was far from over. The forest still held many secrets, and we were determined to uncover them all and end the entity's reign of terror once and for all. After our encounter in the clearing, it became clear that we needed to delve deeper into the forest and its secrets. Our temporary victories were just that, temporary. To truly banish the entity, we had to find its source and destroy it. The days leading up to our next expedition were filled with intense preparation. We pored over old maps, folklore, and any historical records we could find about the forest. Eleanor performed numerous rituals, seeking guidance from the spirits. We all felt the weight of the task ahead, but our resolve was stronger than ever. Lily, although still fragile, was determined to come with us. She insisted that she needed to confront whatever had taken her and reclaim her life. I was hesitant, fearing for her safety, but I couldn't deny her the chance to fight for her freedom. The night we set out, the forest seemed even more foreboding than before. The trees loomed tall and menacing, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to ensnare us. The air was thick with an oppressive stillness, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. We ventured deeper than we ever had, guided by Eleanor's intuition and the fragments of information we had gathered. The deeper we went, the more the atmosphere changed. The air grew colder, and an unnatural darkness enveloped us, pressing in from all sides. After hours of walking, we came upon a part of the forest that felt different, older. The trees here were massive, their gnarled trunks covered in thick moss. There was a palpable sense of dread in the air, as if we were trespassing in a place we didn't belong. "This is it," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. "The source is near." We moved cautiously, every sense on high alert. Suddenly, we stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin. It looked ancient, its wooden walls weathered and covered in vines. There was something profoundly unsettling about the place, as if it radiated malevolence. "This must be it," I said, my voice trembling. "The entity's anchor." We approached the cabin, our steps slow and deliberate. The door creaked open with an eerie groan, revealing a dark interior. The air inside was heavy with the scent of decay and something else, something foul and indescribable. We entered the cabin, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The interior was sparse, with only a few pieces of broken furniture and an old, dusty fireplace. But there, in the center of the room, was what caught our attention. An ancient, intricately carved altar. Eleanor examined the altar closely, her face pale. "This is it," she said, her voice tense. "This is the anchor. This altar binds the entity to this place." We gathered around the altar, the air growing colder and more oppressive. Eleanor began to chant, her voice strong and steady. The rest of us joined in, our voices merging in a powerful incantation. The cabin shook, the walls groaning and creaking. The shadows around us twisted and writhed, forming grotesque shapes. The entity was here, and it was angry. Its dark, shifting form emerged from the shadows, its eyes burning with malevolence. Eleanor's chanting grew louder, and we followed suit, our voices rising in defiance. The entity roared, the ground shaking violently. The air grew colder, and I felt a crushing weight on my chest. But we didn't give up. We pressed on, our voices growing stronger, united in our resolve. The entity's form wavered, its eyes flickering with anger and frustration. I could feel its grip weakening, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. It let out a final ear-piercing scream before dissipating into the shadows, leaving us in silence. We stood there, panting and shaken but unharmed. The cabin felt lighter, the oppressive presence gone, but I knew this was only a temporary victory. The entity was weakened, but it wasn't defeated. It would come back, stronger and more determined. Eleanor turned to me, her eyes filled with determination. We need to find its source, its anchor to this world. There must be something in this forest, something that binds it here. We need to find it and destroy it. I nodded, my resolve strengthening. We had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, but our journey was far from over. The forest still held many secrets, and we were determined to uncover them all and end the entity's reign of terror once and for all. We knew we had to destroy the altar. Eleanor sprinkled salt around it, chanting prayers for protection. The rest of us gathered any flammable materials we could find. Mark doused the altar with gasoline, and I struck a match, my hand trembling. The flames roared to life, engulfing the altar in a blazing inferno. The cabin shook violently, the walls groaning and cracking. The entity's screams filled the air, a haunting, anguished sound that echoed through the forest. The flames consumed the altar, and with it, the dark presence began to dissipate. The air grew warmer, and the oppressive weight lifted. The cabin, now engulfed in flames, began to collapse. We hurried out, watching as the structure crumbled into ashes. As we stood outside, the fire casting a warm glow on our faces, I felt a sense of relief. We had done it. We had destroyed the entity's anchor, breaking its hold on this world. But as we turned to leave, I noticed something strange. The forest, which had always felt dark and menacing, seemed different. The trees looked less foreboding, the air lighter. It was as if a heavy shroud had been lifted, revealing a forest that was no longer haunted by darkness. Lily stood beside me, her eyes clear and focused for the first time since her return. She looked at me, a small smile forming on her lips. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. We walked out of the forest, the sense of victory and relief palpable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there were still secrets buried deep within those woods, secrets that we had yet to uncover. As we reached the edge of the forest, Eleanor turned to us. "This may be the end of this chapter, but the forest holds many more mysteries. We must remain vigilant." We all agreed, knowing that our journey was far from over. The forest had changed us, binding us together in ways we couldn't have imagined. We had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, but the mysteries of the forest still beckoned, waiting to be unraveled. Life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy after our confrontation with the entity in the forest. Lily was slowly recovering, her memories returning in fragments, but the experience had left its mark on all of us. We stayed in close contact, supporting each other as we tried to move on from the horrors we had faced. However, the forest and its mysteries continued to haunt me. I felt an unshakable pull, a lingering sense that our work wasn't done. One evening, while going through some of my grandfather's old journals, I stumbled upon an entry that made my blood run cold. It detailed a ritual to permanently sever the ties of an ancient entity bound to a place, a ritual we had only partially completed. It was then that I realized our victory might have been an illusion. The entity wasn't gone, it was merely dormant, waiting for the right moment to return. I knew I had to go back and finish what we had started. I gathered the group once more, explaining what I had found. The gravity of the situation was clear to everyone, and despite our fear, we agreed to return to the forest and perform the final ritual. This time, we would leave no room for error. We set out on a moonless night, the darkness around us a stark contrast to the warm glow of our flashlights. The forest seemed to welcome us, its silence more profound than ever. As we ventured deeper, we could feel the oppressive presence returning, a sign that the entity was stirring. We reached the clearing where the cabin had stood, now just a charred patch of ground. Eleanor began setting up the ritual space, drawing symbols in the dirt and placing protective charms around us. The rest of us gathered the necessary materials, salt, candles, and a book of ancient incantations. Eleanor started chanting, her voice strong and unwavering. The air grew colder, and a dark fog began to roll in, swirling around us. The ground trembled, and we heard the distant, haunting growl of the entity. It knew we were here, and it was ready to fight. We stood in a circle, our hands joined, as we chanted the incantation together. The fog thickened, and the oppressive weight grew stronger. Shadows twisted and writhed around us, forming grotesque shapes. The entity's form began to emerge from the darkness, its eyes burning with malevolence. "Stay strong," Eleanor shouted over the roar of the wind. "We must see this through to the end." We tightened our grip on each other's hands, our voices rising in defiance. The entity roared, the ground shaking violently. I could feel its dark thoughts invading my mind, trying to break our resolve, but we pressed on, our voices growing stronger, united in our purpose. The entity's form wavered, its eyes flickering with anger and frustration. I could feel its grip weakening, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. We continued to chant, the power of our combined voices pushing back the darkness. Suddenly, the ground beneath us cracked open, revealing a deep, dark chasm. From within the chasm, a blinding light erupted, enveloping the entity. It let out a final, ear-piercing scream, its form disintegrating into the light. The ground stopped shaking, and the fog began to dissipate. The oppressive presence lifted, replaced by a sense of calm and peace. The chasm closed, and the forest fell silent. We stood there, panting and shaken but unharmed. The clearing felt different, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. The entity was gone, banished forever. We had done it. As we walked out of the forest, I felt a sense of closure. The forest no longer held the same dread it once did. It was just a forest, ancient and mysterious, but no longer haunted by darkness. We had faced the evil within it and emerged victorious. Lily walked beside me, her hand in mine. She smiled, a genuine smile that I hadn't seen in a long time. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with relief. "Yeah," I replied, squeezing her hand. "We did." We reached the edge of the forest, the first rays of dawn breaking through the trees. The light felt warm and welcoming, a stark contrast to the darkness we had faced. As we stepped into the sunlight, I felt a sense of hope and renewal. Eleanor turned to us, her eyes filled with wisdom and a hint of a smile. "This may be the end of this journey, but remember, the forest holds many more secrets. Always respect the unknown." We all nodded, knowing that while this chapter was over, our bond and the experiences we had shared would stay with us forever. We had faced the darkness together and come out stronger, ready to face whatever the future might hold. As we parted ways, I looked back at the forest one last time. It no longer felt like a place of fear, but one of mystery and wonder. We had uncovered its darkest secret and come out the other side, and I knew we would always carry a part of it with us. I never believed in curses or the supernatural. As far as I was concerned, Ouija boards were just a spooky party game, a way to get some cheap thrills and scare the crap out of each other. So, when my friends suggested we pull out the Ouija board that summer night, I didn't think twice. It was just supposed to be a bit of fun, but I was wrong, dead wrong. It was the last weekend before we all had to go back to school. We were at Emily's house, a sprawling old place on the outskirts of town, isolated enough that no one would hear us scream if things got too intense. Emily, Jake, Sarah, Tom, and I were all there, gathered around the old wooden table in the dimly lit dining room. The air was thick with the smell of old books and dust, the kind of atmosphere that made you feel like you were stepping back in time. Emily brought out the board, an old weathered thing she said she found in her grandmother's attic. It looked ancient, the letters and numbers faded, the planchette worn smooth from years of use. She set it down on the table with a grin that sent a shiver down my spine. We all placed our fingers lightly on the planchette, stifling nervous giggles. "Is there anyone here with us?" Emily asked in a mock-serious tone, trying to suppress a laugh. At first, nothing happened. We waited, the silence in the room growing thicker with each passing second. Then, slowly, the planchette began to move. I felt a jolt of fear and excitement as it slid across the board, spelling out YES. We all exchanged uneasy glances, but no one admitted to moving it. "Who are you?" Jake asked, his voice trembling slightly. The planchette moved again, faster this time. DEATH. We all laughed nervously, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. It was a joke, it had to be, but the laughter died in our throats as the planchette continued to move, spelling out a single chilling word, NEXT. "What does that mean?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who is next?" Emily demanded, her bravado slipping away. The planchette moved to each letter, with a deliberate slowness that made my skin crawl. AL. We stopped playing after that. Emily hastily shoved the board back into the attic, and we tried to laugh it off, but the mood had shifted, and the rest of the night was tense and awkward. We didn't talk about what happened, but I could see the fear in everyone's eyes. We all went home with an uneasy feeling, like something dark and malevolent was watching us. It wasn't until a week later that the real horror began. Sarah was the first. She started feeling sick, complaining of headaches and dizziness. At first, we thought it was just a flu or something, but then she started having seizures. Her parents took her to the hospital, but the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong. She deteriorated quickly, her body wasting away until she was barely recognizable. She died within a month, her body racked with pain and terror. Next was Jake. He had always been the strongest of us, both physically and mentally. But whatever had taken Sarah got him too. He started hearing voices, seeing things that weren't there. He became paranoid, convinced that something was after him. One night, he snapped. His parents found him in the basement, covered in blood. He had clawed at his own skin, trying to tear something out. He was dead by morning. Tom and Emily went next, almost simultaneously. Tom developed a strange illness that left him bedridden, his skin turning a sickly shade of grey. He wasted away like Sarah, dying in his sleep with a look of absolute horror on his face. Emily started having nightmares, horrific visions of death and decay. She tried to fight it, but she was no match for whatever was hunting us. She hanged herself in her bedroom, her face twisted in agony. Now it's just me. I've watched my friends die, one by one, each death more horrific than the last. I've tried to get help, but no one believes me. The doctors say I'm fine, that it's all in my head. But I know better. I can feel it, the darkness closing in. I can hear the whispers, see the shadows moving just out of sight. It's coming for me, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. I've barricaded myself in my room, hoping to buy myself some time. But I know it's futile. The Ouija board set something in motion that can't be stopped. My destiny is set in stone. I am next. As I write this, I can feel the cold grip of death tightening around me. My hands are shaking, my vision blurring. I don't know how much time I have left, but I needed to warn you. Don't play with things you don't understand. Don't mess with the darkness, because once it has you in its sights, there's no escape. I'm living proof of that, and soon I won't be living at all. After Emily's funeral, I became a ghost in my own life. People around me started to notice my hollow eyes and skeletal frame, the result of sleepless nights and endless terror. I couldn't escape the feeling that something was always watching, lurking just out of sight. My parents were worried, but they couldn't understand. No one could. I started researching, desperate to find some way to break the curse, to stop the inevitable. I combed through old books on the occult, spent hours on forums dedicated to the supernatural, and even tried reaching out to so-called experts in the field. But nothing helped. Every lead turned into a dead end. Every piece of advice was useless. The nights were the worst. The shadows in my room seemed to move on their own, dark shapes flitting across the walls. I heard whispers, faint and indistinguishable, but unmistakably there. They grew louder as the night wore on, a cacophony of voices driving me to the brink of madness. Sleep was a distant memory. I was too afraid of what I might see if I closed my eyes. One night, after days without sleep, I heard a distinct voice. It was low, gravelly, and it seemed to come from right beside me. "You're next," it said, sending a chill down my spine. I whipped around, but there was no one there. Just the same empty room, filled with shifting shadows. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I decided to visit Sarah's parents. They were kind people, always welcoming and warm. When I knocked on their door, Sarah's mother opened it with a strained smile. Her eyes were red and puffy, the grief still fresh and raw. "Hi, Mrs. Henry," I said, my voice trembling. I wanted to talk about Sarah." She nodded, stepping aside to let me in. The house felt colder than I remembered, the warmth and laughter replaced by an oppressive silence. We sat in the living room, and I could see the pain etched into every line of her face. "She was a good girl," Mrs. Henry said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't understand what happened. I think it had something to do with the Ouija board we used," I said, hesitating. "Did she ever mention anything to you? Anything strange?" Mrs. Henry's eyes widened, and for a moment I thought she was going to throw me out. But then she nodded slowly. "She did. She said she saw things, horrible things. She was terrified, kept saying something was after her." My heart sank. It was the same for all of us. Whatever we had unleashed, it was relentless. "Did she ever say what it wanted?" Mrs. Henry shook her head. "No, she just kept saying it was coming for her." I thanked her and left, feeling more hopeless than ever. The drive home was a blur, my mind racing with fear and despair. I tried to focus, but the shadows seemed to close in around me, the whispers growing louder. When I got home, I found my parents waiting for me. They looked worried, their faces drawn with concern. "We need to talk," my dad said, his voice stern. I followed them into the living room, where they sat me down. "We've noticed changes," my mum began, choosing her words carefully. "You're not yourself, and we're worried. We think you need help." I wanted to tell them everything, to unload the burden of my fear and despair, but I knew they wouldn't believe me. How could they? It sounded insane, even to me. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired." My dad frowned. "We're not buying it. We've made an appointment with a psychiatrist. You're going." I wanted to protest, but I knew it was pointless. They were right in a way. I did need help, just not the kind they thought. "Okay," I said, defeated. "I'll go." The psychiatrist's office was a sterile, clinical place. All white walls and uncomfortable chairs. Dr. Harris was a kind-looking man in his 50s, with a gentle demeanour. He asked me about my symptoms, and I told him about the shadows, the whispers, the fear that gnawed at me day and night. He listened patiently, nodding thoughtfully. "It sounds like you're experiencing severe anxiety and sleep deprivation," he said. "Have you considered medication?" I shook my head. "I don't think that will help. It's something else, something real." Dr. Harris sighed. "The mind can play tricks on us, especially when we're under stress. But I can help you manage your symptoms, at least." I left with a prescription for anti-anxiety meds and sleeping pills, but I knew they were just a temporary fix. The real problem was still out there, waiting. That night, I decided to confront it. I pulled the Ouija board out from where I'd hidden it, in the attic, covered in dust. I set it up in my room, lighting candles to ward off the darkness. My hands trembled as I placed my fingers on the planchette. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice shaking. The planchette moved slowly, spelling out a single word, P-A-Y. "For what?" I demanded, tears streaming down my face. "K-I-L-L. My blood ran cold. "Who did we kill?" The planchette didn't move. The candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I felt a presence behind me, a cold breath on the back of my neck. I turned around, but there was nothing there, just the darkness closing in. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the corner of my room, clutching the planchette, too scared to move. The whispers grew louder, the shadows more insistent. I knew then that there was no escape. My destiny was sealed. I am next. The days following that night blurred together in a haze of fear and paranoia. Every shadow seemed to harbour a lurking terror. Every whisper carried the promise of doom. The medication Dr. Harris prescribed did little to help. The anti-anxiety pills made me feel numb, but the fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface. The sleeping pills were worse. They brought dreams more vivid and horrifying than any nightmare I could imagine. In one dream, I found myself back in Emily's dining room. The Ouija board spread out before me. My friends were there, but they were different. Their skin was pale and translucent, their eyes hollow and lifeless. They stared at me, accusing and silent. The planchette moved on its own, spelling out the same words over and over. Kill. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. My parents were beside themselves with worry. They couldn't understand what was happening to me, and I couldn't tell them. How could I explain that I was being haunted by a curse we had unleashed that summer night? How could I make them believe that something supernatural was at play when I could barely believe it myself? Desperate for answers, I decided to visit Tom's parents. I needed to know if he had experienced the same things before he died. Maybe they had some insight, some clue that could help me break free from this nightmare. I drove to their house, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Mrs. Anderson opened the door, her eyes red from crying. She looked older, more frail than I remembered. "Oh dear," she said, her voice trembling. "It's good to see you. Come in." I stepped inside, the familiar scent of lavender filling the air. The house was filled with pictures of Tom, a constant reminder of the vibrant, joyful person he had been. We sat in the living room, and I struggled to find the words to ask the questions that had been gnawing at me. "Mrs. Anderson," I began, my voice shaky. Did he say anything strange before he died? Did he mention seeing things or hearing voices?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with pain. "Yes," she said quietly. "He was so scared. He kept talking about shadows, about whispers in the dark. He said something was coming for him." My heart sank. It was the same for all of us. Did he ever say why? Why this was happening? Mrs. Anderson shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, he just kept saying it was his fault, that he had done something terrible, but he wouldn't tell us what." I left the Andersons' house feeling more hopeless than ever. The drive home was a blur, my mind racing with fear and despair. The shadows seemed to close in around me, the whispers growing louder. I couldn't escape them, no matter where I went. When I got home, I found a note from my parents. They had gone out for the evening, leaving me alone in the house. The silence was oppressive, the air thick with a sense of impending doom. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I decided to try the Ouija board again. It was a desperate move, but I was out of options. I needed to know what we had done, why this was happening. I set it up in my room, lighting the candles and placing my fingers on the planchette. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice trembling. The planchette moved slowly, spelling out a single word, Pay. "For what?" I demanded, tears streaming down my face. "Kill. My blood ran cold. "Who did we kill?" The planchette didn't move. The candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I felt a presence behind me, a cold breath on the back of my neck. I turned around, but there was nothing there, just the darkness closing in. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the corner of my room, clutching the planchette, too scared to move. The whispers grew louder, the shadows more insistent. I knew then that there was no escape. My destiny was sealed. In the following days, I became more reclusive, avoiding my parents and friends. I stopped going to school, too afraid to leave the house. The shadows were everywhere, the whispers constant. I felt like I was losing my mind, spiraling into madness. One evening, as I was sitting in my room, the air grew cold. The shadows seemed to grow darker, more substantial. The whispers became a cacophony, a chorus of voices chanting my name. I could feel something approaching, something terrible and inevitable. I grabbed the Ouija board and planchette, my hands shaking. "What do you want from me?" I screamed. The planchette moved rapidly, spelling out the same word over and over, P-A-Y. "For what?" I cried, tears streaming down my face. "What did we do?" The planchette stopped moving. The candles flickered, and then the room went completely dark. I could feel a presence, cold and malevolent, surrounding me. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or scream. In the darkness, I saw them. The faces of my friends, twisted and deformed, their eyes hollow and accusing. They surrounded me, their voices merging into a single deafening roar. "You will pay!" I woke up in the hospital. My parents standing over me, their faces etched with worry. They told me I had been found unconscious in my room. The Ouija board shattered around me. They thought I had tried to hurt myself, that the stress and fear had finally pushed me over the edge. But I knew the truth. The darkness was closing in, and there was no escape. My friends had paid the price, and now it was my turn. The whispers were louder than ever, the shadows darker. My time was running out. I am next. The hospital room was stark and sterile, the bright fluorescent lights a harsh contrast to the dark, oppressive nightmare I had been living. My parents hovered over me, their faces etched with concern and fear. They wanted answers, but I had none to give. How could I explain that I was being hunted by something beyond our understanding? The doctors and nurses were kind but skeptical. They talked about stress, anxiety, and hallucinations brought on by sleep deprivation. They prescribed more medications, ordered more tests, but I knew none of it would help. The real problem was something they couldn't see, couldn't touch. Something that had already claimed the lives of my friends and was now coming for me. After a few days, they discharged me, convinced that rest and a change of environment would do me good. My parents took me home, but the house felt different, colder. The shadows seemed darker, the whispers louder. I was constantly on edge, jumping at every creak and groan the old house made. I spent my days in a fog, my nights in terror. Sleep was a rare, fitful thing, plagued by nightmares. In every dream, I saw my friends, their twisted faces and hollow eyes accusing me. They reached out for me, their hands cold and clammy, dragging me into the darkness. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a noise. It was a faint scratching, coming from the attic. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened, the sound growing louder and more insistent. I knew I should ignore it, try to convince myself it was just my imagination, but something compelled me to investigate, to confront whatever horror awaited me. I crept up the stairs, the old wood creaking under my feet. The air grew colder the closer I got to the attic, my breath visible in the dim light. I reached the door, my hand trembling as I turned the knob. The door swung open with a groan, revealing the dark, dusty space beyond. The Ouija board was there, lying in the center of the attic, its pieces scattered around it. I approached it slowly, my heart in my throat. As I got closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The board was covered in words, written in a dark, sticky substance that looked disturbingly like blood. P-A-Y, K-I-L-L-H-E-L-P. I fell to my knees, tears streaming down my face. "What do you want from me?" I screamed into the darkness. The shadows seemed to close in around me, the air growing colder. The whispers became louder, a cacophony of voices echoing through the attic. I felt a presence behind me, cold and malevolent. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Standing there, just at the edge of the light, was a figure. It was tall and thin, its skin pale and translucent. Its eyes were hollow, empty sockets that seemed to suck in all the light around them. It reached out a hand, bony fingers curling towards me. You! I stumbled back, scrambling to get away. The figure stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate. I could feel its cold breath on my face, the stench of decay filling my nostrils. I was trapped, nowhere to run. nowhere to hide. "Please," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Please, leave me alone." The figure tilted its head, as if considering my plea. Then it spoke, its voice a harsh, grating whisper that seemed to echo in my mind. "You must pay for what you have done." "What did we do?" I cried, tears streaming down my face. The figure's hollow eyes seemed to bore into my soul. "You unleashed me. You brought me into your world. Now you must pay the price." I shook my head, trying to make sense of its words. "But we didn't know. We didn't mean to." The figure's lips twisted into a grotesque smile. "Ignorance is no excuse. The debt must be paid." I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, the figure's grip tightening painfully. I screamed, the sound echoing through the attic. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the figure's hollow eyes, staring into mine. I woke up in my bed, drenched in sweat. The attic door was closed, the house silent. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination brought on by fear and stress? I wanted to believe that, but deep down I knew the truth. The figure was real, and it was coming for me. The next few days were a blur of fear and paranoia. I could feel the figure's presence everywhere I went, its hollow eyes watching me. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. My parents tried to help, but there was nothing they could do. The figure was always there, just at the edge of my vision, waiting. One evening, as I sat in my room, the air grew cold. The shadows seemed to grow darker, more substantial. The whispers became a roar, a chorus of voices chanting my name. I could feel the figure approaching, its cold breath on my neck. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure was there, standing in the doorway. It stepped closer, its hollow eyes fixed on me. I could feel its cold hand on my shoulder, its grip tightening. "Your time is up," it whispered, its voice echoing in my mind. I screamed, the sound piercing the silence of the house. My parents rushed in, their faces filled with terror, but they couldn't see the figure, couldn't feel its cold grip on me. They tried to comfort me, but it was too late. The figure's grip tightened, its hollow eyes boring into mine. I felt a cold, suffocating darkness closing in around me. The last thing I heard before everything went black was the figure's harsh, grating whisper, "Your debt is paid." I woke up in the hospital, my parents standing over me, their faces etched with worry. They told me I had been found unconscious in my room. The Ouija board shattered around me. They thought I had tried to hurt myself, that the stress and fear had finally pushed me over the edge. But I knew the truth. The darkness was closing in, and there was no escape. My friends had paid the price, and now it was my turn. The whispers were louder than ever, the shadows darker. My time was running out. I am next. The hospital stay was brief, just long enough for the doctors to observe me and deem me stable. But stability was a lie. It was a veneer that covered the roiling fear and certainty of my impending doom. My parents hovered around me like worried spectres, their concern palpable, but ultimately futile. They couldn't fight what they couldn't see, what they couldn't understand. I returned home to the same oppressive atmosphere. The shadows were darker, the whispers louder, more urgent. I could feel the presence constantly now, a cold, suffocating weight that pressed down on me. Sleep was a distant memory. The figure haunted my every moment, waking or dreaming. I spent my days in a haze of fear and desperation. I combed through every book, every online forum, every scrap of information I could find, looking for some way to break the curse. But there was nothing. Every lad ended in despair. I was trapped, and I knew it. One night, as I sat in my room, surrounded by the remnants of my failed research, I felt the air grow cold. The shadows deepened. The whispers became a cacophony. The figure was here. I could feel its cold breath on my neck, its hollow eyes boring into my soul. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure stood there, its pale, translucent skin glowing faintly in the darkness. It reached out a hand, its bony fingers curling around my wrist. "Your time is up," it whispered, its voice a harsh, grating whisper that echoed in my mind. I tried to pull away, but its grip was like iron. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, the darkness closing in around me, my vision blurred, the room spinning around me. "Please," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Please, let me go." The figure's hollow eyes stared into mine, devoid of any mercy or compassion. "The debt must be paid," it said. "You unleashed me, and now you must pay the price." I could feel the darkness closing in, the cold seeping deeper into my bones. The whispers grew louder, a deafening roar that drowned out everything else. I felt myself slipping away, the world fading to black. And then, just as I thought I was lost, something changed. The whispers stopped, the darkness receded. I opened my eyes to find myself standing in the attic, the Ouija board lying in front of me, the planchette moving on its own. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The planchette moved slowly, spelling out a single word, Free. I frowned, confused. Free? Free from what? The planchette moved again, faster this time, THIS. I realized then what it meant. The figure, the darkness, the whispers, they were all trapped, bound to the Ouija board, unable to escape. We had unleashed it, but it was still a prisoner, still bound by the rules of the game. "How do I free you?" I asked, my voice shaking. The planchette moved rapidly, spelling out a series of instructions. I followed them carefully, my hands trembling. I recited the incantation, lit the candles, and placed the planchette in the center of the board. The air grew colder, the shadows darker. I could feel the presence growing stronger, the whispers louder. I continued, my voice shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. As I finished the incantation, the candles flickered and went out. The room was plunged into darkness, the air thick with the smell of burning wax. For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, the darkness began to lift. The cold receded, the shadows faded. I could feel the presence weakening, the whispers dying away. The figure stood before me, its hollow eyes staring into mine. "Thank you," it whispered, its voice softer now, almost gentle. "You have freed us." I watched as the figure began to fade, its form dissolving into the darkness. The room grew warmer, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. I could feel a weight being lifted from my shoulders, the fear and despair melting away. As the figure disappeared, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The curse was broken, the debt paid. I was free. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. The darkness was gone, the whispers silenced. I was alive, and for the first time in months, I felt hope. The next few days were a blur of recovery and disbelief. My parents were overjoyed to see me returning to something resembling normalcy, and I could see the relief in their eyes. The shadows were just shadows again, the whispers gone. I reached out to Sarah's, Jake's, Tom's, and Emily's parents, hoping to find some solace in shared grief. They were kind, but their pain was still too raw, their losses too recent. I didn't tell them about the figure, the darkness, or the Ouija board. I couldn't bring myself to burden them with the horrors we had unleashed. As time passed, I began to heal. The memories of that summer night faded, the fear and paranoia replaced by a cautious optimism. I knew I would never forget what happened, but I was determined to move forward, to live my life. The Ouija board remained in the attic, a silent reminder of the horrors we had faced. I never touched it again, never even looked at it. It was a relic of a past I wanted to leave behind, a symbol of a debt that had finally been paid. I don't know what happened to the figure, whether it found peace or moved on to another plane of existence. All I know is that it was gone and I was free. But sometimes, late at night, I can still feel the cold breath on my neck, hear the faintest whisper in the dark, and I wonder if, somewhere out there, the figure is still watching, waiting, but for now, I am free, and that is enough.